What tips could you give just kind of the average person, homesteader, person peripherally interested in this type of stuff to get started and to become proficient and comfortable making their own compost and also brewing their own compost tea?
Yeah. Well, there's thermophilic composting, which is getting a pile to heat up to 55 degrees Celsius or 131 degrees Fahrenheit. That kills pathogens and weed seeds. A lot of people who are home gardeners or just kind of composting at home don't necessarily want to take the time, energy, or have the time to do that, to practice that thermophilic composting. So there's thermophilic composting, static composting, or worm composting. Um, for most home gardeners, I'd recommend either static or worm composting. Uh, the common mistakes that people make when they first build a compost pile are a lot of people want to compost their food waste and they don't add enough brown or carbonaceous material. Um, so for the person just starting out, um, check out a book like the Rodale, I think it's Rodale Guide to Composting or Encyclopedia of Composting. I can't remember exactly. Check out kind of the basics of it uh, and figure out a recipe that you want to use. The other thing that a lot of people starting out composting, mistake that they make is to not keep a pile wet enough. Um, I like to compare composting to uh, food preservation. So in food preservation, we dehydrate fruits and vegetables to keep them fresh because bacteria and fungi are what's going to come along and break them down and turn them moldy and turn them into mush. And we're trying to do the exact opposite of that. So keeping things moist and out in the air, uh, like we use Ziploc bags to keep things airtight so that microorganisms also don't get in there. So the opposite of that is to keep things moist and to allow air to get to them so that microorganisms that are passing and floating through in the air can grab onto those surfaces and to help aid in breaking it down. That's kind of one reason I'm against like the tumblers and those enclosed things that people make compost in. Yeah, homebrewed compost tea. Um, there's a lot of variables that can make it good or bad. At When I was at Rodale, we were doing research with what's called compost extract. So compost tea is when you put compost in a mesh bag, put it in water, and agitate it, and add foods for microbes like humic acid, fish hydrolysate, molasses. Some people use molasses, and that adds foods for the microbes to eat and then reproduce. And you're trying to really up the populations. Uh, so you have a kind of condensed version. And extract is when you do that same thing, put compost in a mesh bag, put it in water, and agitate it, but you don't add any food. So you've got the same number of population that you maybe had in the compost. You're not getting them to build up. I say this in that when you're making compost tea and using foods, it's good to have a microscope to be able to check if you've got the good stuff in there and you don't want to have any of the bad microorganisms. And it can be hard for people to brew and not brew for too long. I think a lot of people make the mistake of brewing for several days or putting a bunch of foods in there, which actually makes it go anaerobic because the microbes eat up the food and then oxygen levels drop and it starts to become a liquid that's going to actually be detrimental to plants. So the reason I brought up extract was because it's something that really easy that people can do at home and get results with, where you're just taking like a 5-gallon bucket. And when I do classes, that's what I recommend is a really super simple setup is to get a 5-gallon bucket, a paint strainer bag because they're made to fit on a 5-gallon bucket, and then air pump, or if you're making extract, you don't even need an air pump. You just put your compost into the mesh bag and agitate it for like 5 to 10 minutes and then take that liquid and spray it out. Or if you're going to make a compost tea, err on the side of brewing it not long enough rather than just the correct amount of time. So that could be anywhere from 12 to 72 hours that I'm brewing. The hotter it is, the less time you want to brew. Yeah, tea it's not always the simplest thing to explain or get people to do without messing up or without letting it go bad.
Yeah.
One thing with compost and compost tea is to go by your nose. We're animals that are trained, like if something smells bad, because it's bad for us. So when you smell something nasty in compost or compost tea that it seems off or it seems bad to you, it's most definitely going to be bad for the plants because they're going to be even more sensitive to those types of things.